There is a specific kind of pressure that exists only in the Klondike. It is not the pressure of a boardroom deadline or the anxiety of a mortgage payment. It is the pressure of the permafrost, the silent, creeping cold that can split $1 million excavator in half if a single bolt is not torqued correctly. It is the pressure of a 6-week window where the ground is soft enough to move, knowing that if you fail, the ground will freeze again, and you will have nothing. Into this world, a world that has broken hardened men twice his age, stepped a slight teenager named Parker Schnabel. His story is frequently labeled a rags-to-riches tale, but that label is a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually happened. He was not born in poverty, and his wealth did not materialize from a lottery ticket. What Parker Schnabel inherited was something far more dangerous and far more valuable than money, a legacy of relentless, unforgiving labor, and a stubborn, often heartbreaking expectation of greatness. The true insanity of his journey is not the millions of dollars in gold he has hauled out of the earth by the age of 30. It is the price extracted for every single ounce, paid in sleepless nights, broken relationships, and the quiet, crushing weight of a promise made to a dying man. To understand Parker, one must first understand the geography of his childhood. Haines, Alaska, is not a place where children dream of becoming astronauts or movie stars. It is a place where children learn to run a chainsaw before they learn to ride a bicycle. The entire town of roughly 2,500 people sits at the edge of the vast, violent wilderness of the Inside Passage. The winters are not a season. They are an antagonist, a dark, frozen presence that lasts for 8 months and tests the structural integrity of both buildings and souls. The Schnabel family homestead was not a place of leisure. It was a staging ground. From the age of 5, Parker was not playing in a sandbox. He was in the seat of a D8 dozer at the family's Big Nugget mine, his small hands guided by his grandfather, John. This is the first and most critical divergence from any conventional rags-to-riches narrative. There was no sudden windfall. There was only immersion, the smell of diesel fuel, the vibration of heavy iron, the specific crunch of gravel that indicates pay dirt. These were the sensory inputs of his formative years. He learned the language of machinery before he mastered the grammar of school tests. John Schnabel, known to everyone as Grandpa, is the ghost that haunts every successful dig on Parker's claims. John was not a corporate titan. He was a living relic of the gold rush's spiritual heart. He took over the Big Nugget mine late in life after a career as a sawmill operator, and he ran it with a grizzled, joyful tenacity. Parker sat at his feet, not for stories of treasure, but for lessons in hydraulics, ground stability, and the subtle art of reading a creek bed. While other teenagers were navigating the social hierarchy of high school, Parker was navigating the hierarchy of a mining crew, learning that a mechanic is more valuable than a foreman, and that pride must always take a back seat to a pressure gauge. This environment created a young man with a profoundly unusual relationship to failure. In school, failure is a grade you get a D, you move on. In the Klondike, failure is a season lost, a payroll missed, a mechanic not paid. Grandpa John did not just teach Parker how to find gold, he taught him how to own a problem. When a pump froze and cracked, John didn't call a repairman. He handed Parker a wrench. This hands-on, consequence-driven education forged a mind that sees obstacles not as barriers, but as sequences of bolts that need to be turned. The conventional rags-to-riches story usually features a protagonist who endures a traumatic fall. For Parker, the fall did not come from poverty. It came from love. In 2016, John Schnabel passed away at the age of 96. For most heirs, this is a moment of grief, followed by the sterile reading of a will. For Parker, it was a coup. He was 18 years old. He had just graduated from high school, and overnight, he became the owner and operator of one of the most historic claims in the Yukon. But there was a catch that would define the next decade of his life. The money, approximately $663,400 that was set aside for his college education was still sitting there. A comfortable, safe path existed. He could go to university, study business or engineering, graduate with zero debt, and come back to the mine as a sophisticated owner. It was the logical, safe choice. Instead, Parker made a decision that sounds insane on paper, but feels inevitable in retrospect. He took the entire college fund and spent it on an excavator. He did not buy a sports car. He did not take a vacation. He liquidated his future safety net and converted it into a single piece of heavy machinery. This is the exact moment the insanity of his ambition reveals itself. He was betting his entire future on the premise that he, an 18-year-old with no formal business training, could manage a crew of men old enough to be his father, navigate the volatile global gold market, and extract enough precious metal from a patch of frozen mud to pay for the retention of his employees and the maintenance of his fleet. The college fund was a bridge to a stable life. He burned that bridge and used the ashes to fuel his dozer. What followed was not the glamorous montage that reality television often portrays. The first few years were a meat grinder. He lost money. He broke equipment. He discovered that knowing how to run a dozer is not the same as knowing how to run a business. He learned brutal lessons about payroll taxes, environmental compliance, and the catastrophic cost of a single bearing failure. The show Gold Rush captured this tension, but the cameras often missed the quiet, lonely nights where an 18-year-old boy had to look at a bank account that was hemorrhaging cash and decide not to quit. The acquisition of Dominion Creek is the chapter where Parker's story shifts from impressive to legendary. Most miners his age are happy to wash a few thousand ounces a season. Parker, however, looked at a piece of ground that was considered too expensive, too wet, and too risky for even the largest mining conglomerates. He signed a lease that carried a $15 million price tag, a number so astronomical it mattered shook on their coffee. The terms were brutal. He had to produce 10,000 season just to break even. If it failed, the debt would swallow his entire operation. If it succeeded, he would unlock a reserve of gold valued at nearly $15 million price tag, a number so astronomical it mattered on their coffee. The terms were brutal. He had to produce 10,000 ounces season just to break even. If it failed, the debt would swallow his entire operation. If it succeeded, he would unlock a reserve of gold valued at nearly $200 million. This was not mining. This was poker played with bulldozers. The insanity of this move cannot be overstated. He committed to a payment structure that required him to pull gold out of the ground faster than he ever had before, under the constant threat of financial annihilation. The first few weeks at Dominion were a disaster. The ground, famously wet and unstable, turned into a quagmire. Equipment sank to the axles. Frozen muck clogged the wash plant. The gold recovery was abysmal. At one point, the crew pulled a tiny fraction of the needed gold, and the panic on Parker's face was unmistakable. This was the rags part of the story, real and unvarnished. He wasn't just losing money, he was losing credibility. His crew, who had followed him loyally, began to whisper. The doubt was a physical presence, heavier than the mud. In a conventional story, a mentor would appear with a magic solution. Parker had no mentor left. He had only the memory of his grandfather and the muscle memory of 1,000 small repairs. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He attacked the problem logistically. He didn't pray for better ground, he bought better pumps. He authorized a $540,000 expenditure for high-capacity water systems to drain the swamp. He analyzed the sediment tables and reconfigured the plant. He stopped managing from the warm cab of a truck and started standing ankle-deep in the slurry, adjusting screens by hand. That season at Dominion Creek is the ultimate rebuttal to the lucky miner stereotype. There was no luck involved. There was only a relentless, almost pathological focus on efficiency. He turned the mine into a machine. He instituted rigid maintenance schedules that would make a Navy SEAL proud. He fired friends who didn't meet the pace. He drove himself and his crew to the edge of physical exhaustion, and slowly, the numbers turned. The 135 ounces from the first month gave way to 500, then 1,000, then 2,000 ounces per month. By the end of the season, he didn't just hit the 10,000-ounce target, he obliterated it. He had stared into the abyss of bankruptcy and forced it to blink. He was 24 years old, sitting on top of a 15 million mine he no effectively owned, having pulled out over 15 million mine he no effectively owned, having pulled out over 13 million in gold that season alone. This is the richest part of the story, but the viewer understands now that those riches are merely a receipt for the suffering required to extract them. However, the insanity of Parker Schnabel is not solely confined to geology and finance. It manifests most painfully in his human relationships. The show has documented a trail of wreckage that is as compelling as the gold weighs. The rivalry with Todd Hoffman was never just a television feud, it was a clash of operating systems. Todd Hoffman represented the romantic, faith-based, chaotic energy of the old prospector. Parker represented the cold, analytical, data-driven future of mining. Their conflict was inevitable. Todd would pray for gold. Parker would calculate the specific gravity of the soil. When Todd accused Parker of lacking heart, he was missing the point. Parker's heart is not a warm, fuzzy organ, it is a fuel injector. It pumps cold, high-pressure determination. The public arguments and the sabotage accusations were simply the visible symptoms of two different species trying to occupy the same habitat. The ecosystem of Gold Rush was only big enough for one alpha predator, and eventually, Todd's romanticism lost to Parker's rigor. The personal toll is even more stark. Parker's relationship with Ashley Eula was a rare glimpse of the human behind the hard hat. Here was a young woman who worked in the veterinary clinic at the mine, who saw him not as the boss, but as a boyfriend. For a brief period, the viewer saw Parker smile, relax, and prioritize something other than the daily cleanup. It was a fragile, beautiful thing. But the Klondike devours fragility. The demands of Dominion Creek, the 18-hour shifts, the constant stress of the debt, and Parker's admitted inability to disconnect made the relationship unsustainable. He acknowledged publicly that he failed to prioritize Ashley, that the mine came first. This is not a heroic confession, it is a tragic one. He made a choice. He chose the iron and the mud over love. The riches bought him the mine, but they lost him the comfort of a quiet life. The insanity of his drive is that it leaves no room for anything else. The rumors linking him to other figures in the mining world like Tyler Mahoney are speculative, but they underscore a reality. Parker seems most comfortable with people who speak the language of dirt and rock, perhaps because those are the only relationships that don't demand he stop working. The most bizarre chapter of his professional life, revealing the profound pressure he is under, is the Parker's Trail lawsuit. The spin-off show, which follows Parker on adventures in exotic locations like Papua New Guinea, was supposed to be a fun expansion of the brand. Instead, it became a legal nightmare. Cameraman James Lavelle filed a lawsuit alleging a toxic work environment, creative differences, and a physical altercation that led to his removal from the show. Regardless of the legal merits, the incident is revealing. It suggests that the intense, high-stakes management style that works so brilliantly on the frozen tundra of the Yukon does not translate well to a jungle filming expedition. Parker is a production machine, not a people person. He knows how to move dirt. When the job shifts to moving emotions or managing artistic visions, the machinery breaks down. This lawsuit serves as a crucial reminder that Parker Schnabel is not a media-trained celebrity. He is a mechanic who happens to be on television. When he is frustrated, he breaks things or fires people. It is authentic, but it is also volatile. To ask whether Parker Schnabel is happy is to miss the point entirely. Happiness is a passive state, a satisfaction with what is. Parker Schnabel is driven by a dissatisfaction with what is not yet dug. He is the heir to a vision. He went into Dominion Creek with a $15 million debt and walked out a multimillionaire. But the victory is hollow in a way only the victor can see. He has achieved what his grandfather dreamed of, and now he has to find a new mountain to climb. The rags to riches framework suggests a destination, a point where he hangs up his hard hat and retires to a beach. But Parker has been working on a beach of mud and permafrost since he was 5 years old. He does not know how to stop. His story is insane because it defies the logic of self-preservation. He leverages everything he owns, constantly. He risks his physical safety, his mental health, and his personal happiness for the sake of a number on a scale. But if you listen closely, you realize the number doesn't matter. The gold is just the scorecard. The real game is the battle against the ground itself. He is trying to prove that he is worthy of the legacy John Schnabel left him, and because that legacy is infinite, his work will never be done. The gold he pulls from the creeks of the Klondike is not just a precious metal. It is a monument to a promise kept, a testament to a grandfather's faith, and a heavy, glittering anchor chain tying a young man to the frozen earth. That is the real insanity. Not the money, not the fame, but the unbreakable, exhausting, and wholly voluntary chain of duty that drags him back to the mine site every single spring.